Well, good morning. We are here at Oberlin, Ohio with Randall Wagner, master organ builder, retired vice president of Organ Supply Industries, and a founding member of the Organ Historical Society. I'm Brian Tim, the current vice president of Organ Supply and a fellow organ builder. We're here to reminisce and discuss your lifelong passion, Randy, of the pipe organ and its lasting impact on both the organ building community and on the artistic developments of the pipe organ during your time. As we begin, can you tell me a little bit about your childhood, where you grew up? I know we're not far from it. What was your family like?
I grew up in Wellington, 9 miles south of Oberlin, and it was an uneventful childhood. Of course, I had uh, miles to walk to school every day and
Uphill both ways?
uphill both ways. Uh, Great little town, had a lot to offer. And uh, mother was a school teacher, math, and my dad was a lawyer and village uh, solicitor. So it was fun growing up in a small town.
Nice. Was was anyone in your family musical? Or
Not
did you pioneer that?
well, I think I really pioneered it. A number of people in the family had uh, a slight acquaintance with either a violin or piano, but nothing that was stimulating as far as I was concerned. Somehow, I got I heard an organ, and I thought it was the most wonderful thing in the world. And of course, on Sunday morning, uh, there was a small two manual, 13 right J.W. Steer and Son tracker in the church. And it fascinated me what was behind all of those wonderful gold pipes. And it was a sound that I immediately identified with. So much so that, believe it or not, I would put packing boxes together in the form of an organ console. And anytime Hammond organ music would come on the radio, there I was doing my thing. Well, as it turned out, the church organist became my piano teacher. And with her academic training, uh, she tried her best to make a pianist out of me before she would teach me organ. And she uh, was kind enough to take me under her wing and point me in the right direction. And between her, Mrs. McCormick, and the local librarian, I was borrowing books on the organ from the Oberlin College Library through interlibrary loan until the librarian said, "This is going too far. You're at a point now where somebody can take you over to Oberlin. Let's ride over and I'll get you a card at the old Carnegie Library here." So here I am, junior high, taking out every book on the organ, which was extensive, including some things that should not have been taken out, like Dombedo and uh, things of that nature. Uh, so this was my introduction to the organ in visual form, because whether the book was in English or French or German or Dutch, I could read the pictures and stop lists. And this is how I started.
So the hook that got you into this, and I have a question about this. I can ask if there's any one moment, but you've told us what that moment is. You approached it through a musical perspective that grew into a mechanical perspective. Um, I know when I'm asked my interest in it, I had a father who was an engineer and I tore things apart and put it back together. So that was You came to it through the musical avenue, and you had the support of your teacher, and the librarian. Um, how'd your family support you on this? What was their thoughts of raising an organ builder?
Well, in the interim, I somehow got my fingers into uh, parlor organs, reed organs, and I rebuilt literally two, uh, redoing the bellows. How I got the ability, I have no idea. But with hot glue and rubber cloth, uh, I restored them. I had a big Esty in my bedroom, uh, and so there was the mechanical aspect also. I wasn't afraid to take things apart. Did I get them back together all correctly? Well, most of the
Most of
time.
the time. So you started with parlor organs. When did you get your first pipe organ?
South Northern High School,
What was it?
four rank Wicks. Uh, in, we took it out in June. It was probably the hottest of June on record. Um, it was in a second floor balcony, and my father thought I was nuts, and I had proved it. But it that came home. I had to cut the cable on it. Uh, it came home. It was put in the garage. I rewired it in the garage and entertained all the gardeners in the neighborhood for the summer.
So one would say for your parents to give up their garage and
So
some
that was just
valuable space. They were staunch supporters of this interest of yours.
they really were, and I think they were just happy to get me off the streets.
Well, that's a good thing. That was apropos. So after the Wicks, just being the beginning, what are some of the other instruments that you had after that?
Well, the second pipe organ happened my senior year in high school. Um, Old Stone Church in Cleveland on the square was being rebuilt, and I got the chests out of the solo organ. So I had Skinner chests. Uh, I had an Aeolian reservoir, and it goes on from there. But it was my Aeolian Skinner, and that went in the house, which because we lived in an older house, I had permission to drill holes in the floor, and I'm talking about 8-inch wind line holes. And it sat in a room just off the living room, and 7 ranks, so 2 manuals wasn't too bad. And it got me an A in physics class.
Well, that explains the connection with HGTV too that you currently have. Um, so from during your high school years, your first formal apprenticeship started with Homer Blanchard, correct?
Yeah.
When did how did you get introduced to Homer? Can you tell us a little bit about Homer? Because he was local
Correct.
too.
Uh, Basically, the trying to get my order. Uh, as a kid, I wrote every organ builder I could find. I was taking the diapason, and I was going down through all of the ads, and the I had stacks of literature, pictures of organs, stop lists, sales brochures, etc. Homer moved to Oberlin in 1952 to be Northern Ohio representative of MP Mulber. And he, one Saturday or Sunday, whatever it was, brought his kids, over to Wellington to see the trains come through. And he thought, well, I've got this prospective person in Wellington, I'll just drop by and see what's going on there. And I think he was a bit shocked to find a sophomore high school. It was in 1953, with an interest in the organ, who had already a 4 Wix. And he setting up his own business, not only sales, but maintenance business here in Oberlin, could needed a key holder. So it was downhill from there. I held keys after school, weekends, summers, what have you. But the nice part about that was Homer was a scholar. He had a PhD in German. His doctoral thesis, which is up here, had to do with the etymology of organ building terms. And we would go off to tuning and have these discussions on organs. And on occasion, he would bring a book along that completed our discussion of the previous. So I had book learning as well, and which accounts for my love of books on the organ. He was very good and with the scholarly approach as well as the mechanical approach. And of course, servicing a wide range of organs. I saw everything from trackers, early American trackers, to tubular to electric action instruments. So
Very nice. And your mentorship with Homer, or your employment with Homer, when did that conclude? Was that when you went to college, or?
no, actually, it I worked for Homer full time for 6 years after I graduated from college. By that point, he was building one or two instruments a year in a little shop just south of town, which no longer exists. And I got to the point where I was managing that because he went back to teaching German at Ohio Wesleyan University. But in the meantime, Homer's interest in early American organs rubbed off on me. Uh, his church in Elyria, when he was growing up, had a Johnson organ uh, of some repute, and he then started to research Johnson and got involved with a lot of other people who were also doing early or 18th century, 19th century research on American organs. And so this began the, how do I want to say, the interest, my interest is a wide ranging interest. I'm interested in the history. I'm interested in the music. I'm interested in the mechanics, the historical mechanics of the uh, instrument. So it's the whole of the instrument. The weakest one is my ability to play. I'm a better organ builder than I am an organist.
So it's interesting to hear, and we've talked about this various times over the years that we've known each other, but it's almost like, not to draw a selfish parallel to this, but you were an open book for Homer and somebody to take on the interest. I know that you're still in contact with
It's
his
true.
kids and his family, and I know that they appreciate the organ and everything that their dad did, but you seem to be the vessel that wanted to absorb all that from him. Not dissimilar to us meeting along the lines, just have to say, as everyone has commented on. Um, but I want to back up a little bit and ask you. So I mentioned you going off to college, and this is always an interesting thing for me because my degree, as you know, is in organ performance and a minor in business administration, which sort of lends itself to what we do at Oregon Supply today. But you went to Ohio Wesleyan, Delaware.
Mhm.
What was your major?
My major was English with the minimum amount of English and the maximum amount of liberal arts because I was smart enough to realize that I had to be able to talk about something else besides the pipe organ. But interestingly enough, as freshman week, I went to New York with the head of the music department, brought back a small practice organ that had been built at Union as a master's thesis and installed it in the conservatory at school, had it up in play uh, before I even started to school there. So that was type organ number three.
That's pipe organ number 3. Cannot have enough, as I well know too. Um, so the the other side of that question, this is for, we're in a little bit different times where getting your degree has become more of a norm than it was during your time. How do you feel that the degree, regardless, yes, you had to talk about other things in the pipe organ, but do you feel that regardless what your degree would have been in, that it helped you along your career path? This is for upcoming generations that continued education is never.
Yes, in several ways, writing, reading, uh, in business, you're doing a lot of letter writing, you're communicating uh, at times. Uh, art courses were very useful for me, more mechanical than color wise. Spatial relationships and how things fit in spaces and how spaces can be uh, arranged.
Yep. It was a recent conversation with Marie that I was having about this too, and there's something about, being in a mentorship, you're being told and guided with someone to learn the manual skills, and then going off to college is sort of a self-starter for everyone. Here's the project, now you have to go do it. It's not being micromanaged, so you learn some of that self-drive in that process too. Um, so after your time here in Wellington, Oberlin area with Homer, where did your travels take you? What were the decisions? Where were the next? Give us a line out to your final place of employment.
Okay. Uh, with Homer, I really, I won't say I burned out, but with building organs all day, coming home doing the paperwork at night, what have you, I just came to a point where I had to get away from it. And I took time off, went to England for uh, a month, and came back and thought, well, now it's time I've got to get a job. And I thought I was going to go off into something else, which was not the case. And I interviewed a number of organ builders, realizing almost every one of them was had a place for me, but it was family owned. So in the future, there really wasn't uh, a goal that I could ascertain and hold on to. And I ended up working uh, for Chick Holtkamp, which was really a great experience. I always held Walter Holtkamp in high esteem for what he was able to do to bring organ building in America forward. And with Chick, it was the finer aspects of visual design the fact that if you line up a series of pipes, you don't put the same spacing between each one of them. Little things that
Asymmetrical balance.
and asymmetrical balance. And this worked out extremely well. Uh, but of course, Chick had a family. Chris now, of course, has taken over the company. So after a couple of years, um, I was actually interviewed by Organ Supply Corporation. They were looking for someone because their management team was getting older. And in the process, uh, they were a bit antsy about interviewing me because Holtkamp was buying a lot of chest work from them. And I had interacted with them. And as we were departing, they said, "Oh, by the way, Reisner in Hagerstown is advertising. It might be a good idea if you contact them, see, so that you weren't just interviewing us." I did. Reisner made a better offer. Reisner being major supplier of electrical components to the pipe organ industry. And lo and behold, I ended up in Hagerstown, Maryland, just down the street from NP Moeller, the largest organ company in the country.
Also known as Hagersbush.
That's mine.
An area we know well.
That's for sure. And got to know the Hefsco people, the engraving people, some of the other offshoots from Moeller. I was there for 7 years and realized that I was enjoying working with organ builders, but I wasn't in the whole realm of the organ. And I let it be known that I was looking, and Chick Holtkamp was one of the people that I talked very frankly with. And Chick called Organ Supply and said, "You have to hire Randy. You need an organ builder," or words to that effect. And Fred Gluck, who had just purchased company, and I had a conversation, and lo and behold, I moved to Erie in 1976 and very much have enjoyed the time there
It is an interesting place.
because Organ Supply is a supply house where you can buy a box of screws or a complete organ for organ builders. Uh, you have, I enjoyed the conversation of and about the organ, the technical end of it, the next levels up.
Yes. I find the same thing. It's good to be talking and sharing ideas. A lot of ideas are shared there, and I think a lot of customers enjoy the fact that they can call somebody that can meet them at their level too. It's not just about product, and it's about the end results.
A lot of teaching.
Yes.
I realize how much teaching I have done over the years.
Yep. So sort of a follow-up on, so it from Blanchard, it was Holtkamp, then Reisner, then to Erie. Um, and you're gonna have to remind me, and I should know this because what year did you retire? Because we talk daily or weekly, so it doesn't seem like you have in my mind.
Yeah, really, um, in 12,
Okay.
exactly
Yeah.
36
30
years
years.
to the day.
It's all about dates with us, isn't it? So at Holtkamp, you had exposure to the organ industry. Reisner, you had exposure to more customers probably in the organ industry, and at Organ Supply, you were dealing fairly worldwide with what you were doing. Are there any persons in the organ building community that you would consider had a major influence on your way of thinking, your way of building, what you saw for the future as a leader of any of these companies?
It was interesting because every place I worked, I connected to the business end of it with Homer. It was educational as much as and uh, introduction to uh, actual instruments. With Holtkamp, uh, it was the design factor. It was what it looked like, uh, uh, and his method of doing business. So I took away a lot of um, tools
Mhm.
from there. Bill Reisner was a CPA, actually, and uh, was an incredible business uh, owner. And prior to uh, computers, that place was so well organized for time collection, for following inventory, uh, right straight through, even uh, the drawing department. So I have a great deal of respect for Bill Reisner in that regard. And then, of course, moving to Erie again, uh, Fred Gluck, who prior to Organ Supply was president of Aesthetic Corporation, making that manufactured microphones and cartridges for uh, phonographs. And again, it was the business aspect of running the business, and he embraced my understanding of cost accounting and job costing.
And that was when you came on board at Organ Supply, that was sort of a exciting time. It must have been an exciting few years because Fred had just purchased not one, but two organ companies. And they were still operating in each of their locations. And over the years, you picked up other assets along the way from the organ building community, but then later down the road, IC Heard and DC Chimes, Deegan Chimes, Malin Chimes, um, and Reisner ultimately came to Erie,
Yeah,
and now Hesco has come to Erie.
that's right.
So it's been an exciting time for you to see not just organ building, but to see how businesses can be acquired and amalgamated for to perpetuate the industry.
Erie was has been a very interesting uh, incubator for pipe organ because it started out with one. It mushroomed then into a number of other smaller uh, and larger companies. Godfrey Organ Supply, Durston Company, Erie Reed Pipe Company, etc., up through uh, probably 1929, when there were probably 300 people or more in Erie operating in the organ industry. And it then began to shrink, and we, Foreign Supply is the remaining. Uh,
And I'm constantly reminded what a small world it is in organ building, and people outside of my circle of um, since organ is sort of a strange thing in today's world in smaller communities, will ask me, and like the most, if you've been bit by the organ bug, it's like being bit by the theater bug, which is most most relatable to anyone else. Is and that holds true. As I told you last week, I had an inquiry about Anton Gottfried from someone that his father was married to Anton's sister, and I've connected him with Anton's great granddaughters that are has kicked off a whole realm of things. So it's interesting how it permeates the, it's not just manufacturing. Um,
The organ is a disease for which there is no known cure, whether you're an organist, an organ builder, or an organ enthusiast. And
the organists and organ enthusiasts usually in a well-placed joke is the exponential increase of a terrorist. So one last technical building question I have, Sue, that I dreamed up here on my way over. Um, so you've seen when you started building with Homer and everyone else, we're dealing at a time of, yes, mechanical instruments, electropneumatic instruments. There were electromechanical unit action. You've seen a wide variety, as you pointed out. But in your lifetime, you've seen the development at Organ Supply too of very customized chest actions. Um, there's anything from just a standard Organ Supply Pitman chest. You've seen Ventil action. You've seen even Goulding and Wood's special action, which sort of works. Slider chest is very similar to Wurlitzer. We've seen our share of theater stub. But in your time at Reisner, you were working with a lot of mechanical switching, magnet technology, uh, manipulating Ohm's law like a wizard, and understanding all of that. And again, the mechanical switches that go with it, from pneumatic consoles to electric consoles. And it's sort of been with the technology booms that we have had in, the past 20 years at least. This has more horsepower than any computer you've ever seen on your desk. Um, we've seen that solid state world creep into console controls and has pushed some organ innovation too. Pneumatic shade engines have become servo motors that you can control not just with 8 stages, but 128 stages if you want to. What do you think is the most significant development in your time period for to that yields the musical result? Because we're going everything from no combination action to a set combination, fry combination to, right now, pistons out the walls and sequencers. And
of course, electricity was the first thing to uh, take the organ uh, to a new level. And solid state has blossomed when it comes to especially combination action, uh, also control of note action for non-mechanical instruments. But we seem to be going back to the original slider chest as being the best uh, tonal approach. And it's just a matter of controlling that. With solid state, costs came way down. I remember when I was at Reisner, we were working with an outfit that then was in Erie, ISS, one of the very first um, developers of combination actions. And the cost compared to a Reisner remote combination action was almost half. So it has been good in that regard.
you've eliminated the delays and
My
GC signal and
Yeah.
more fluid control.
The organ builder was really very clever in using mechanics to get at the pipe work. Uh, but it's done much more efficiently electronically.
We've all walked around that big console being rebuilt with a new solid state combination behind it, and you see a few cards and a power supply, and you go, what do you do with the rest of the real estate now? So
You bring your bed, your cup of coffee.
so enough of the organ building per se. We're going to jump backwards now and I want to know about the Oregon Historical Society. You're a founding member of it. There's got to be plenty of stories and perspectives of how it began, what it what did you set out to do? Why don't we start with you telling me about how this sort of came to be?
Well, Homer, of course, and I had mentioned the Johnson, Oregon, in Elyria. Homer was quite interested in the history of, uh, I was going to say the last century, 2 centuries ago, the 1800s in America, and the incredible amount of organ building that took place, all mechanical tracker. And as I was growing up and as I met Homer, this was the time when those instruments were old fashioned. They were being set aside because we could have a new electric action organ. And those that were restored, we didn't, we were learning the hard way. We threw out the big reservoirs, which was a mistake because it was easier to put in a small reservoir for each division. Um, and Homer was very careful to document every instrument he saw in the process. And I have some of his notes from little places that I've never heard of here in Ohio that I really willing to check out when I decide to do it. Uh, but he then began to correspond with a number of people. He was writing note of small uh, articles for the American Organist and the Diapason, and was having feedback from Walls Kimball, Kimball Organ Company, Walter Holtkamp, and others, talking about root positives and this sort of thing. So in 1956, uh, this group of people discovered they were all going to New York for the AGO convention. And that happened to be the year I graduated from high school. And my the gift from my parents was money to fly to New York, stay at the Waldorf, which was the uh, hotel for the AGO, and to accompany Homer. And it was there that the group had agreed to meet in the choir room of St. Bart's, which is adjacent to the Waldorf. And here I am, green behind the ears, and going to New York and for the first time and meeting a lot of interesting organists that Homer knew, what have you. So we had our meeting, and it was Barbara Owen was the force behind it all. Uh, and she was literally the force behind it all. And after our meeting, we decided, well, let's go see a few organs. And we hopped into a couple of cabs, and there were about a dozen of us, and started out visiting churches and places that somebody knew something about. One place we knocked on the door at the rectory, and the housekeeper answered the door. And Homer explained that we were there and would like to see their interesting organ. And she scratched her head and she said, well, who shall I tell a priest is calling? And Homer, without thinking, said the Oregon Historical Society. So that's where that began. And my fondest memory is Old St. Patrick's Moss Street uh, with its big 3 manual urban organ. And in the center of the case is low C of the great 16-foot principle. And there must be 15 feet of tubing from the chest around to that pipe, and you could simply do this and the pipe would speak. It was just the memory. Yes. Finally, today, the organ is being restored. So,
Nice. So, being one of the youngest members of the group, do you feel that that had any
well,
were you along for the ride, or was it sort of
oh no, I was very much involved with it. Uh, in the process, I met uh, Gigi Glottergotz, and they saw the little uh, met him, and then D.A. Funtraub, who brought a one manual organ to New York. Problem is, he didn't know about the difference in electrical standards, 50 cycles in Europe, 60 cycles in America. And the mower people went up to Union Theological Seminary, grabbed a blower from one of the practice organs to put it on the instrument, which eventually came to Oberlin. Yes, it's since left Oberlin, unfortunately, but it that was one of the things. Uh, so again, meeting a lot of people in the process, and we agreed that we were going to communicate by a round robin letter. And this was back in the day of the mimeograph and the spirit duplicator. And the organist at, oh gosh, um, Eric, Robbie Robinson agreed to keep us informed. And that was our reply all at that point.
analog email?
Yeah, analog email, that's for darn sure. And that's where it started. Uh, Early on, I did serve one term with the group once they organized. I think it was the second year or so, and Barbara Owen was very much behind that. And then we began to do a yearly convention, which was certainly ragtag because it was everybody hopping in cars and driving through the wilds of Vermont, ending up in barnyards with all kinds of strange places. Because I think it's over there. No, it's over there. And that all developed. My involvement in has always been on the fringes. I've not been a scholar to contribute very much, uh, but I've always been interested in the operation of the organization and have served on the council, I think twice now, if not more. And the talking with people who are in charge, the CEO, members of the board, what have you, making mine, uh, putting in my 2 cents worth. And I found that they have been very receptive, and I have been able to, uh, I think, provide some guidance from the outside, whether it be business, whether it be organ, um, whether it be library, variety of thing. So it's just quietly sticking pins in from.
Well, as the organization came into being from the first meeting and as it developed, um, was there ever any strategic goals of what the organization was setting out to do to accomplishments? Because
Well,
we had that conversation the other night about have the goals all been met that you set out to do, which is kind of leading me into my next question. That's coming. But, you know,
well, yeah, the organization basically has been able to establish an incredible library, over 15,000 books, almost everything written about the organ. Uh, it has developed an archive, uh, which now occupies a lot of square footage, uh, and is a depository for information from closed organ companies.
Mhm.
Uh, we have done seminars. Uh, we the big thing is the yearly convention, which is a fun time to see and hear examples of previous instruments. Now, the instrument, I say previous instruments, instruments that um, could even be just finished. We're now including them all because the Organ Historical Society is about the pipe organ and its history and where it's been, where it's going along the way. We finally have a home. We were in several spots with storage for the archives and storage for our little bookstore, and storage for the library, uh, now in Villanova, PA. Where we're going from here is sort of a twofold thing.
You're jumping ahead of me because I didn't ask you that one yet, but you know where I'm going.
Uh, it is the fact that it has been a volunteer organization for long, many years. And volunteer organizations in today's world don't attract the volunteers. We wind up hiring people, and we're big enough and complex enough that we need certain skills, managerial skills, uh, archival skills in this case, uh, to keep going. And the catch my dear, with Villanova, we're now settled in. And of course, now moving forward, we have spaces there for um, symposia. We have space, obviously, for research, which is what we're doing. Where can we go in the future? We can go a lot of places, uh, and more uh, small group meetings on specific topics. Uh, there is so much to be done in the way of research. Somebody's got to write a book on many of the builders that are no longer here. I'm thinking of Schlicker, for instance, among others, where there was a lot going on there. Um, and in the future, I think this is where it's going to be more of a teaching and research. And we have the ability to bring people in
Mhm.
for that.
So we have established a sizable archive, and
Yeah.
with the facilities and stuff, gives a bright future for education and academic pursuit on organ building.
Hmm.
So, with all of that, I'm gonna I'm gonna pull us back to our concluding topic that I have, and that's now that you're retired, technically, with all this time on your hands, I don't think that ever happens. Your daily duties are over. Tell us, what how's life at Kendall treating you? I mean, you have Overland um, College right here on your doorstep, and I know it's hard to get a hold of you at times because you're busier than when I think you were working. So,
Well, not quite, but at, it- at any rate, retirement is great. The fact that Kendall is at Oberlin, the fact that Oberlin has a wonderful conservatory, which I sampled when I was in high school. I studied for 1 year with Leo Holden, who was retiring that year, on a wonderful Lewis and Hitchcock three manual unit organ. Um, the but there is so much musically going on here and educationally that one can get very much involved. I'm still involved with organ supply and with you.
Yeah,
We talk.
I keep you hopping.
Oh, Randy, by the way, I saw this. What can you tell me about this 1920
Yep.
thanks ago?
Yeah. Please confirm this for me.
I sometimes think I'm supposed to be a walking encyclopedia, but that's why I go back to
That's the nature.
that's why I go back to the library. But no, this has been a wonderful, wonderful experience here, and we are so energized with so many things to do. And
And you've been active on the Lorraine County Community Foundation.
yes, outside of
And
Oberlin.
you've taken up the handbell mantra, as I understand.
Yes,
You're still involved in the wood shop over in here,
not a lot, but
but on facilities, poking your nose into all new construction.
facilities, dining matters, the biggest thing that,
Yes.
so it's been a wonderful place to be and wonderful people.
I'm glad you've enjoyed it. I don't have any more questions for you. Do you have anything, any words of pearls of wisdom, as it were?
Well, I don't know. At this point, probably not. I think we've done very well.
Well, thank you for your time.
Thank you, sir.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you for letting me crash.
And by the way, thanks to Keeps the Wood for
Absolutely.
being our technician today.
And bring his bike over in a rainstorm.